Hey there, you're listening to the EmpowerTech Podcast with Iyari Cevallos. This podcast is where we discuss all things tech and explore the growing ways in how we can leverage technology to lead smart, sustainable, and impactful lives. On this episode, we speak to Ellen Manning about how organisations today can leverage data analytics, what some of the tools and techniques are, and what to watch out for. Ellen is a data and analytics leader, empowering organisations to do bigger, better and smarter things with data. Currently pursuing her MBA, she holds a PhD in astrophysics and has built a career creating value as a data scientist. Ellen, it's great to have you here today. It would be great to get started on our conversation on what you focus your time on. What does a day in the life of Ellen look like professionally?
Thanks. As a leader in data and analytics, my job is really to bridge the gap, the communication gap between data engineers, analysts, scientists, and business stakeholders. So I need to understand what the business is trying to achieve, what problems they're trying to solve. Sometimes they don't know what they want, so they'll ask for a sales dashboard when what they're really trying to understand is why sales have been dropping. Then I need to set expectations, figure out whether it's even possible. Are we measuring the right things? Are we collecting the right information to be able to measure these things? The other side of what I do as a data analytics leader is more strategic. So a lot of that involves creating work for ourselves and justifying it alongside the business requests. So that can be things like going out to stakeholders proactively and finding out how or if data could make their jobs easier. Looking at the organizational strategy and finding out where we can add value.
Okay. Sounds really interesting to be in that kind of bridge between somebody's imagination of what they can see and get to make decisions and what actually exists, right? I imagine you're sometimes trying to paint a vision of what's possible. Would that be fair?
Yes, yeah. So ultimately, the aim of a data and analytics function, including AI, is to empower better decision-making, to drive benefit for the organisation. It could be better quality, faster service, cost optimization, increasing revenue, basically just doing things better, faster, smarter. So there's a bit of a disconnect sometimes, as you put it, between what's possible and what's a bit more fanciful, especially with all the hype around AI. Yes, yeah.
Fanciful is a good word. I guess what I'm hearing, right, is that data is at the center of what you're doing. And given that many of us know that information is key to making good decisions, what are some of the main challenges that you face in leveraging data analytics? Is there reluctance at the moment still, even with, the fanciful things that people see these days?
Yeah, definitely. That's still quite common. I think a lot of it is people think of data and analytics as more of a reporting function or a cost center rather than like one of the most powerful strategic partners that you can have in a company. And because of that, we're not engaged when developing the strategy. It's more later on, only to report on the progress. And as I said, sometimes we can't even measure the things that they want to measure. It's very common saying, if you value it, you need to measure it. And as you were sort of saying, data driven is a bit of a buzzword that's thrown around, and I think some people aren't clear on exactly what that means. It's not necessarily everyone having access to reports and dashboards. It's more data or information should be leading the conversation. As I gave an example with strategy, you've got all your historical information that you collect for your organization. Let's look at some of the trends and factors driving success there, and maybe that will help in where we can move into gaps in the market strategically.
So can you give us an example of something that you might be looking for trends on for strategy conversation?
So I've done a lot of work on marketing. So we built internally in an organization that I worked with what's called a market mix model. And what that does is to attribute marketing spend to sales or quotes, so we can understand how much benefit we're getting for advertising in each channel. For example, TV or on Facebook or whatever. You also have to take into account other factors. For example, people tend to take out insurance after a big weather event because you get a bit nervous about your house or your car or whatever. So we also have to take that into account. But because marketing is like a long-term activity, you can have short-term tactical things, but it tends to be longer term. That's definitely a strategic decision. Where do we need to invest in that kind of thing?
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So when you're producing, I guess, some of that input into the strategic discussion, and I'm hearing that it's not always a report, so it might be something that looks more like a model or insights, what are the sorts of conversations that the group ends up having as a result of that? I assume that when you produce this for the first time, there's a bit of reluctance potentially.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So I'll address the first part of that first. So the kinds of conversations that we have, especially with more senior leaders, as you say, sometimes it's just those insights. It's not a big report with a whole pile of numbers. It's simply, we've got these levers to pull. We think this is going to be the most effective. So for the money that you want to invest, this is going to have the most impact, kind of thing. Sometimes there is reluctance to go with recommendations for whatever reason. As I said, we base it on historical data, and so the big fat assumption there is that history can help us understand the future. And a good example of when that doesn't work is COVID. Nothing historically could have suggested that 2020 was going to be the way that it was. But in a lot of situations, it does help inform. But when you have the data saying something different to gut instinct, then that's more of a difficult conversation. And it's completely fine to disagree. Being data-driven is making sure that you're making informed decisions. So, yes, that's what the recommendation is, but I'm going to go this way because of X, Y, Z.
Okay. And would you say that the key there then is that the insights or the information form a part of the conclusions that you make in making decisions going forward, and sometimes they're more highly weighted and sometimes they're more lowerly weighted in terms of how they contribute to your thinking, right? In terms of informing you.
Yeah, definitely. Especially if we have to make a lot of assumptions or there's limitations in the data. Maybe there's values missing. It's poor quality, whatever. Our job as data and analytics professionals is to call that out, be completely transparent. This model tends towards false positives over false negatives, for example. So saying things are one way when they're not. So being completely open about the limitations, does help that decision.
So what would your advice to leaders be in this space of attaining insights from data in their organisation?
As I said, like lack of trust in the data can come from poor data quality, but also low data literacy. Like lots of people are not numbers people. So I think every organization needs to have a data strategy to improve or maintain those two things, especially if you want to develop an AI strategy. In this digital age, like a business can't survive without leveraging their data. So specifically to leaders, I guess model that data-driven behavior, show that you're making informed decisions and justifying when you disagree, being really open about that process, and ensure that data quality and literacy is part of your strategy.
They're really important things to remember from a foundational perspective, right? We know that AI works on information and data, and if you don't have great data or are able to access it easily to be able to gain insights, then you're kind of starting from ground zero, right?
Yeah.
I get really interested in what happens under the hood of great data analytics, Ellen. So I really want to talk about some of the tools and techniques that you use day to day today. Can you talk us through some examples of some of the things you do in your profession?
Yeah, definitely. So very broadly, there's 4 types of analytics: descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive. And that's in order of difficulty, but also potential value that you can get out of the solution. So descriptive is what happened, how many sales did we make? Diagnostic is why did it happen? Why did our sales drop? Predictive is what we think will happen, the future sales. And then prescriptive is what should we do about it? So the example I gave before was increasing marketing in certain channels and maybe pulling back in others. So my background is in data science, and so I work mainly with predictive and prescriptive analytics, specifically a subset of AI called supervised machine learning. And that's where I use historical, well-understood data to train models to predict future outcomes and to understand complex relationships between different factors. A couple of examples of those are regression, which is where you fit data to a mathematical equation. And another one is decision trees or classification that we build off of the relationships between those input factors. But the most important part of my role is being able to communicate that information to leaders, to non-data people, to enable them to make informed decisions in their roles.
Yeah, this sounds really important what you do, but I can see how people might get lost in the minutiae of some of the techniques that you use. But I really liked how you laid out those 4 different types of analytics. So obviously descriptive and diagnostic, most people know what that is, in terms of these were what our sales figures were and this is why. I imagine that is something that's quite familiar to people in terms of their role. But that predictive and prescriptive, I think, really highlights the difference between what do we see today versus what do we think that, looking through that crystal ball, how do we determine what the future might be? So with some of the predictive and prescriptive, is this where sort of AI is enabling us to take that part of what we do to another level?
Yeah. So there are so many different types of AI, and I mentioned machine learning earlier, and generative AI like ChatGPT is a form of machine learning as well. But instead of numbers that I use, the inputs is lots of unstructured text, and that's what we call a large language model. And the output is simply predicting the next string of text. So if your input data set is the whole internet, for example, and a particular phrase occurs many times word for word, then your Gen AI tool is more likely to quote that correctly. Because, as I said, it's simply predicting the next string of text. That's why some people refer to it as regurgitative AI, but it's very quickly becoming really sophisticated. Another example would be image creation. Again, the input is images, and based on your instructions or your prompt, it makes a prediction for the output based on its training data set.
Okay. So I now understand the link between what you described in the data analytics space to what we're seeing on things like ChatGPT. If I go back to the examples or the work that you do with organisations, do you find that some of the challenges include not having enough data to be able to have good predictions?
Yes.
Because, ChatGPT has access to so much, but in an organisation, you're kind of relying on what the organisation's been measuring, right, and keeping and storing. So what do you do when that happens?
Yeah, so it depends on the type of problem. So an example we've been dealing with recently was we were trying to build a report based off of what officers enter into the system. So we were trying to build a report off of that. And then we found out that most people, when they're entering this information in, they choose the other category rather than this is primary, this is secondary, whatever it is, everyone is choosing other. So the report is just a giant number in the other field, and don't understand what we are actually hoping to measure. So sometimes the data team has the unenviable job of saying, well, you need to go and train your frontline staff on how to enter information correctly into the system.
Yeah, because it has a purpose that they don't understand, right, I assume. And they're also saving time by doing other. Yes.
Yeah, and it's not as though they're trying to be obtuse. As you say, they don't know that there's downstream ramifications. So I can't hold someone to account by them not meeting their KPIs if I can't measure them, and maybe them not doing their job correctly is going to impact those frontline officers that is entering it in. So when you fix it somewhere, it fixes the whole loop kind of thing. Yeah, and then another example that you mentioned before is, sometimes you just don't even measure it, and then we have to suggest that they add another field in the system to collect that data, and then you've got to wait 6 months until you've got enough. But once you go through this a couple of times, that really helps uplift the data literacy of those leaders, because they understand how important it is and they change the way that they think. Maybe this is a KPI that we want to measure in 6 months' time. We need to add it into our processes now so we can measure it down the track.
So this reminds me of, having that strategy in place, right? Because if you've done the work to define what it is that you want to measure, to define how successful you're being or not being, then you can understand what you capture and don't capture, and then you can request for things to be captured. I suppose through this journey that an organisation might have, and I'm assuming a few are having today, that there is also a lift or an improvement in our ability to look at the data and what we're seeing and be more critical of what we're seeing. Would that be fair?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Like that example that I gave where everyone's categorizing it a certain way. That's something that could have been prevented if we could have surfaced that data earlier, and we as data professionals might not have clicked straight away that, hey, everyone's categorizing it as other, but the leaders in the business that understand what the process should be, they'll be able to call it out. Well, no, almost nothing should be other. It should be primary, secondary, whatever, and fix that quicker.
When leaders start to see, I guess, the efforts of their labour in terms of insights, do you find that changes their effectiveness?
Yes, definitely. A lot of the time they want to make informed decisions and want to incorporate as much information as they can to their decisions, and they don't have it readily available, so they look for other things, or they look for proxies that might indicate how things are going. Whereas once you build up that foundation, as you said earlier, working with the business and making sure that our data quality is good and it's accessible and it's timely, then it definitely speeds up that decision-making process, and leaders that want to take on as much information as possible, it gives them more confidence in the decision that they're making, because it's backed up by this information. So the decision-making process is definitely much more effective.
Fantastic. Now, is it worth my time, I guess, is what we're answering for leaders. And it sounds like it is. But I'm also wondering, I've heard about things like synthetic data, or being able to access data outside of an organisation in a legitimate way to be able to inform predictive type models. Can you talk us through when you might want to do something like that?
Yes, I've got a great example about that, because I love talking about biases. I mentioned earlier it's a data professional's obligation to make any limitations or assumptions transparent. A big part of that is any biases that are present in your data. You didn't use these words earlier, but garbage in, garbage out when it comes to that kind of thing. So if you build a recruitment model to help you select the best candidate, but you've only ever hired females, then your model, if you base it on only your data, is only going to recommend females. that might be what you want, or it might not be. So one way to help solve that problem is synthetic data, as you said, or to take data from external organizations or external sources.
Okay. And can you tell us what exactly is synthetic data?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways that you can synthesize data. So if we go to that female only hiring model, it might be to take a third of those records and say they're male and turn another third of them into non-binary, for example, would be the simplest version.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also the option of completely making it up. So you think about exactly what you want in a candidate, what the ideal candidate is, and you create records based on that. And then you create records based on who you absolutely wouldn't want to hire, and you feed that information into the model as well. So there's multiple different ways that we can synthesize data. It depends what you're trying to achieve, and yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So some of it is, I guess, not copy-paste, but maybe copy-paste and change, and some of it is creating it from scratch. And I assume with looking for other data sources, there are organisations, and one that comes to mind is the census data that we have here in Australia, that I know that that's available to add to your model if it's applicable to what you're trying to do, right? Are there other examples that you have so that people can get a sense of what's out there?
Yeah, so the census is a really good example. And another common one, I've forgotten the company name, and maybe that's a good thing, but it's property information. It's
yes.
How much a house sold for, when it's sold for, what are the attributes, and so that's used by mortgage lenders for one, sometimes also for insurers, that kind of thing. So there's lots of different sources of data. The Queensland government, for example, has an open data platform. I only know about Queensland because that's where I live. Mm-hmm. And you can get information open source on when fireworks are going to be planned. So if you've got one of those pets that really doesn't like fireworks, you can build your own report and plan holidays around where the fireworks are going to be.
Well, that's a very unique source of that data for sure. And I also wanted to touch on data that comes from satellite companies, because I know that industry is exploding in terms of the amount of satellites that are being shot up into outer space. What sort of data would they capture, and what sort of models would you expect that data to be used on?
That's a really good question, and I'm not entirely sure. I guess it depends on the accuracy of the satellites. If we focus on non-people data for a minute, because people-focused satellites is a bit creepy, if they've got high enough resolution, you could do geo mapping with them. And I don't know how accurate they are, but maybe even estimate the terrain and heights of things. So instead of a surveyor going down somewhere to a site to figure out the level and what the ground construction is, maybe the starting point is for that is satellite data.
And again, you've said a few key words there. One is accuracy of the data, and then making decisions about what's important to know accurately and what's not. What decisions are you making with that accuracy? Because I would assume that in the first instance, if you have low accuracy, you can make higher level decisions. But then if you want to make really important decisions and you do want high accuracy, then you might spend some money to get high accuracy data. So lots of different things in there around
Mhm.
making decisions and investments on data as well for some organisations, I would assume.
Yes, definitely.
Strategy comes to mind again. Good place to start. I think you've touched on Gen AI as well, and I'm wondering, for people that are potentially looking to the future and what they might want to invest in for their organisation, I'm hearing that having a team dedicated to data is important. What else are you seeing that organisations are doing that you think they're heading in the right directions to prepare themselves for being better at this?
Yes. Oh, that's a great question. What I have seen is when data analytics functions are centralized so that you can have a standard framework of ethics and governance and management and ensure that data is used responsibly and safely within your organization. It's obviously important for data professionals to work closely with the business to understand the context and the problems that we should be helping solve. But it's really important to make sure that we're doing it, as I said, responsibly and safely. And that's a lot easier to manage in a centralized function, I have seen. There might be decentralized organizations that do it really well. I have not seen them.
Not yet.
Not yet. Yes. And as I mentioned before, having data as part of the strategy, and you touched on it as well, understanding what we're trying to achieve and managing data as a strategic asset. It sometimes it is significant investment required if we need to use it to meet our strategic objectives. But like any other strategic asset that you invest in, you should expect return on those investments. So treating data that way, I've seen is a very successful way for organizations to get value out of their data.
Fantastic. I can hear in the crowd, I'm sure, some wheels spinning on how they can move forward on their data journey. So I want to close out with our listeners. I am really keen to make sure that we give them some top tips on how to empower themselves in this space. Ellen, what would be your top tips for our listeners to empower themselves to do something different in their organisation or be more informed? What would you suggest in this space?
I love this idea. I love empowering people to do things themselves better and faster and more effectively. So I guess the first top tip is understand what you're trying to do and figure out which tool will work best for that. So in the business world, lots of people might want to do AI because it's new and shiny, but sometimes that's not required at all and you're over-engineering the situation. On an individual level, for example, if you need help with a research project, then you want to find a large language model with internet connections so it can cite its references. So we all have heard that AI hallucinates, but if you use one and require it to cite its references, you can check the information that it's getting you. So first top tip is understand what you're trying to do and figure out which tool to use to achieve that. Another one is think very carefully about what information you enter into an AI tool, how that data is being stored, and will it be used to train models in the future. So this one is why a lot of companies just lock down access to ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot, because people have been entering in giant financial documents and asking ChatGPT to summarize it, and that information can be stored and used in future models, which is clearly not ideal.
And Ellen, it might be a good time to point out that your organisation may have invested in tools that are just for your organisation, but the tools that are coming out are really powerful, and therefore people are sort of starting to get quite excited about using those. So there is a difference, right, in terms of how your data is being used depending on what you're using.
Yes, definitely. And on similar lines to that, you want to think about the data that they have used to train the model. I said it before, garbage in, garbage out. I won't mention the organization, but a large technology company used Reddit data to build a Gen AI model, and the suggestions that came out of it were very unhelpful. And a memorable example is, if I want to keep the topping on my pizza from falling off, add non-toxic glue. So any human knows that's insane. But a lot of interesting conversations happen on Reddit, and if you build a model on Reddit, you have to expect that kind of thing. But back to empowering people in their own lives, I suggest experiment in a safe way. Be specific in what you're trying to achieve, and be prepared to keep trying it again. So the more instructions you can give a Gen AI tool, the better it'll be able to help. And if it gives you something that's useless, say, no, please summarize that, or I just want 5 dot points. Can you rewrite that kind of thing? And I've found that saving the prompts that work the best is also
saving prompts.
Yes.
We're really becoming pros at this.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Ellen. It was lovely to speak to you and the work that you do. Fascinating tools and techniques that you're on the tools with every day. So I really enjoyed our chat, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening today. Do keep in mind that this is a podcast for informational purposes, and all we're really doing is sharing our opinions on things that matter to us. With that being said, if you liked what you heard and want to continue supporting us, share this podcast with your network to help us grow and bring on even more guests. Until next time, this is Iyari from EmpowerTech, signing off.